Hey, hello. Hey, hello. Hit test. Hey, hello. Hit test. Hey, hello. Okay, yeah, that would, fade through. I forgot about that. Okay. Well, the audio issue is fixed now. I'm gonna keep playing this. I'm not gonna redo what I already did, even though the last stream was completely mute. Just gonna... Yeah, I'm gonna only just go for 2 hours. It's pretty fucking late. I believe this is the one. Kanoe drifted in the mysterious space. Music echoed in the distance. It didn't take long for him to realize it was a dream. This time, it was dangerous. He struggled to wake up, but his body wouldn't listen to him. He couldn't even move the tip of his tail. It was like he'd become an object, not himself. Before long, the pulsing sound started. This was bad. Kanoe desperately wanted to escape. Light blocked his view, as if ridiculing him. The fourth light was a vivid red, a choking red like a bloodbath. A wet touch coiled itself around his ankle. It was a serpent, probably a red serpent. It was impossible to break loose. The snake slithered up his body just like the other three. The snake whispered in his ear. Do you feel it? It gradually tightened around his neck. When the red scales touched Kanoe's skin, they burned like a branding iron. Kanoe furrowed his eyebrows and trembled. The skin on his neck burned and festered. Even if he tried to grab it and pull it free, his palms sizzled and singed. Feel it overflowing from my scales, my tongue, my eyes, my heartbeat, my existence. Do you feel it? What was he supposed to feel? It was so hot that Kanoe thought he'd prefer to just be strangled to death. It was hot. So hot. He heard the sound of flesh burning and the sound of fur sizzling off skin. Answer. What am I to you? What do you feel? Kanoe scratched at the snake's body, but his fingertips only smoldered. The scales he scraped off scattered and fell to the ground. Answer. Kanoe needed to answer. An answer. As soon as Kanoe thought of his answer, the red snake loosened. Kanoe buckled down to the semi-translucent floor, convulsing. It was painful. It was probably the most painful of all these dreams so far. When he touched the festering wound on his throat, a sharp pain ran through him. Apologies, answering something. Kanoe's tongue stuck out as he wheezed. At his side, he heard a sound like rising steam. His view, full of pain and heat, was colored red. It was the snake. The snake flickered its tongue as if it were spitting out flames. Is it painful? Is it hot? That resentment, that anger, they are the source of everything. They become my sustenance. The snake glided on the floor to approach him. Even if he wanted to escape, Kanoe's body felt like it was on fire and he couldn't move. It would be over soon. If it was like the other dreams, it would be over soon. Kanoe closed his eyes and waited for it to end. The heat of the serpent moved even closer, but... the dream, the nightmare, did not end. The serpent coiled around Kanoe's neck and raised its head to his cheek. He heard a voice clearly in his ear. All have gathered here. The red serpent. It tried to part Kanoe's lips and enter his mouth. Accept me. Kanoe twisted his body in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Because of the disgusted reaction of his body, he was going to try and catch that snake. Disgust. But it entered his mouth without letting itself be caught. I do not understand that sentence. What? Oh boy. It slid from his mouth to his throat, and kept going further down still. Tears of pain ran down his face. He couldn't breathe. Kanoe felt like violently retching. The snake wriggled its body. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw the red tail disappear into his mouth. Snake vor, snake vor. The feeling of the foreign body inside his throat faded away. Kanoe's ears lowered and his tail felt weak, and he laid down, exhausted. Saliva dripped from the corner of his lips. The dream had not ended. The red snake entered his body and disappeared. He couldn't tell how much of it was a dream. Was it really a dream? Through the red space, he heard rustling of fabric. Kanoe's fur bristled. Through the red space. Okay. He knew those three colors all too well, and his eyes widened. Serpents, green, yellow, and blue. The three-colored snake slithered on the floor to him. He tried to get up to flee, but his body didn't have any strength left. No way, Kanoe muttered without blinking. The green snake touched his trembling lips. A strangely pliant mass parted them. The green serpent slid down his throat. Accept me. Kanoe's voice wouldn't come. His throat was blocked. He felt dizzy, nauseous, and shed fearful tears. They all united and surged. Like the red snake, the green snake disappeared into his body. Then the yellow and blue ones. He closed his eyes, having no will to open them again. Maybe he didn't want to look. Accept me. His mouth was forced open, his tongue forced aside. Accept me. Filled with hatred and humiliation, Kanoe shed tears. His nose burned, his trachea was pushed open. He heard the wet sound of something sliding against his esophagus. He thought that if it were pushed any further, it would be wrenched apart. His consciousness clouded. Kanoe just wished this would be over soon. This was no dream. Suddenly, Kanoe came back to consciousness. He looked up at the dark ceiling. When Kanoe jumped up, he immediately covered his mouth with both hands to stifle his cry, and he breathed roughly, his shoulders rising and falling. His skin was damp with sweat. Hatred welled up. The snakes, were they inside his body? Such a thing. It was just stupid. He was being ridiculous. One hand groped at his stomach as he thought about this. Kanoe clearly remembered a long body passing into him through his throat, and the touch of scales. 4 had entered into his body. He felt like something wriggled in his belly, and a chill ran down his spine. The chill became more severe and turned into intense nausea. No idea what's going on. We haven't even met any of the boy prospects yet. Kanoe remembered the snakes disappearing, one by one, into his mouth. Dream or reality, it did not matter. Blech. He wanted to claw his stomach apart. Kanoe covered his lips with a trembling hand and crawled out of bed. He couldn't make it outside in time and fell down, vomiting on the floor. Even as he emptied his stomach, the nausea did not stop. He was possessed with a hatred and fear that rose in his throat. Kanoe thought that something about his state was strange. Something was wrong. With his body, no. With something more vague. Like his feelings, his consciousness, his emotions. It hurt. It felt so painful. Kanoe started vomiting stomach acid and began to shed pitiful tears. He continued to vomit until his cheek met the floor and he passed out. Smelling earth, Kanoe lightly opened his eyes. The floor was right under him. He seemed to have lost consciousness and had fallen on his face. When he raised his head, he felt it ache, and he grimaced. His mind felt dim and heavy, his thoughts dull as mud. When he tried to rise, Kanoe noticed his body was oddly stiff. He felt a terrible cramp in his stomach. A different scent rose along with the scent of the soil, and Kanoe finally began to remember the night before. Yesterday, he had a dream. A bitter thought spread through his mind, and Kanoe bit his lip. Kanoe couldn't even tell if he was dreaming. He had vomited until he lost consciousness. How deplorable. Kanoe slowly got up. He swayed unsurely on his feet. Whenever he moved, his head began to ache again, and Kanoe put a hand against the wall, gritting his teeth and slowing his breathing. The remnants of what he'd vomited up were still on the floor. He cleaned it up with a broom made of branches, then covered it with sand. Scooping water from the barrel, Kanoe rinsed his mouth and washed his face and hands. The outside world was already tainted with the color of the moon set. How long had he slept? Kanoe sat on his bed and felt like he was sinking through the floor. Kanoe laid down and solemnly looked at the dark room. He didn't want to think about anything. Kanoe was certain his thoughts would only be of terrible things. Instead, he decided to groom and stretched his arm out slowly to do so. It was a habit. If he did it fervently enough, Kanoe would stifle his feelings. He stopped, his tongue still sticking out. Something felt wrong when he regarded his arm. He was at a loss for words. There was something on his arm. It danced on his skin and looked like a mark. It stood out clearly, and even rubbing it with his other hand, it didn't make it fade. Since when did he have this? He certainly didn't have it yesterday. It must have happened while he was unconscious. The pattern drifted all the way to his wrist, on both his left and right hands, and on his feet, too. His heart beat painfully. It seemed to pierce through his body, trying to escape. Those are actually kind of sick-looking tats. Kanoe broke out in a cold sweat. His vision became hazy, and his ears rang. When Kanoe fell to the floor with a jerk, he began to rub sand against his arms and legs. Even though his skin began to turn red, he kept rubbing. Still, the black marks remained. Shit! Kanoe flung sand at the floor with all his might, becoming more and more confused and irritated. He felt like tearing up all of his furniture. He harshly clawed at the floor. Unable to keep still, Kanoe began to pace around his home, lost. He didn't understand why this happened at all, and in this state, he couldn't go outside. In the small village of Kaoru, the cats didn't seem to interact very much. But the ties between them were unexpectedly strong. This was something Kanoe couldn't fit in with. Furthermore, the cats of Kaoru weren't exactly tolerant. Even if you were brethren, you would be exiled if deemed a threat. Then there was the mental state caused by their poverty. If discovered, he didn't know what would happen. Close relationships with other village cats didn't matter. Even those without any close friendship could still live alone without accommodations. However, the home in which Kanoe lived had memories of his mother, memories of his childhood. Therefore, this was one place he always wanted to remember. Leaving the village would be the same as throwing away the memories of his mother. It was the only thing that brought him warmth. He didn't want to lose it. Kanoe suddenly stopped pacing and looked back at the door. The cat had arrived. Visitors were usually rare. Why now, of all times? Kanoe heard knocking at the door.
Konoe, いるか?
Kanoe, are you there? This voice, it sounded like Sin, the hot-headed cat with whom he'd settled a territorial dispute the other day. Oh, oop.
俺、死んだけど。
It's me, Sin. You in there? Kanoe considered pretending to be out, but it was too late to hide the signs of his presence. His presence had already been given away. Sin knew he was inside. Kanoe approached the door.
今手が離せない。
I'm
後
busy
にしてく
now.
れ。
Go away. His voice was hoarse. He felt thirsty, and his heart kept pounding in his ears. Please leave, he prayed. And he'd already felt that Sin had a hand on the... But he already felt that Sin had a hand on the door. The hair in his body stood up. I cannot read today.
大事な話だ。
It's something important.
開ける
Don't
な。
come in.
なんだよ。
What is
具
it?
合でも悪いの
Are
か。
you sick? Kanoe made a fist, his palm sweating. He pushed his head against the wall and closed his eyes tightly, then opened them and stared at his dark room. Was this how cornered prey felt when fleeing? His breathing sounded rough. Kanoe shook his tail to vent his frustrated feelings. When its tip came into view, he almost cried out. He covered his mouth with his hands at once. His tail was a white one, tinged with brown at the tip. But as it was, shaking in front of him now, it was pure black. The edgification has happened. He has become full emo. The process is complete. Kanoe couldn't believe his eyes. He caught his tail and drew it towards himself. He tried to rub it, but the color still remained. It was an ominous black, dark as night. He heard Sin sigh through the door.
わかった。でも
I
大事な
get
話
it,
だから。
but I
ここ
do
で言う。
have something important to say, so I'll just say it here. Kanoe didn't want to make his frustration known. He tried to steady his breathing.
長からの通達があった。
It's a message from the elder.
これでわかるよ
You。get it now, right? Sin's voice sank darkly. A message from the elder? Kanoe's view shook greatly. Did that mean he had been chosen as the sacrifice? His whole body stiffened and his hands felt numb. His vision narrowed and darkened. A sacrifice, eaten alive, his flesh torn apart while he still lived. Rent by the fangs of starving cats, consumed down to the bone.
掟には従え。それが民の義務だ。そう伝えろと言われ。
Obey the rules. It's your duty to our people.
それだけだ。
That's what I was told to tell you.
確かに伝
That's
えたからな。
Thin fled. For Kanoe, it was a death warrant. He had begun to shake desperately. He was chosen as the sacrifice. At such a time. Especially at such a time. After his body was purified, it would be eaten. Where would they start? Where would they start with his... Would they start with his fingers? Would they start with his stomach? Or would they start with his neck? Kanoe thought about that and laughed. Obey the rules? It was his duty to their people? It was ludicrous. He felt like he was going mad. Kanoe cast his eyes to his arm with its hateful markings. Because he'd rubbed sand against it, the skin was now red hot. His tail shook at the edge of his view. What he saw wasn't a mistake. Now, he understood how the cats who developed the sickness must have felt. Nothing mattered. Despair was steadily drawing near. Kanoe felt gloomy, and gave his colored tail an absent-minded look. The night sky was dark, and he didn't make any light to illuminate his dark home. He thought that his tail might disappear into the darkness. Not just his tail, his whole body. What about his ears? He was alarmed. Were his ears like this too? Kanoe couldn't see them unless he could find a way to view his reflection. He remembered that he had a fragment of reflective glass and reached out to the shelf. What about your water barrel? It was a strange shard that he picked up from the remnants of 2 canes, and it allowed him to look at himself. Kanoe raised the fragment in front of his face. Against the background of the dark room, his blonde hair was reflected, and among it were 2 pitch-black ears.
どういうことだ。
Don't worry, we'll take care of the blonde soon. Soon your hair will match. You will become full emo. What is this? He whispered. It came out unintentionally. Kanoe was struck by a feeling of weariness and returned the mirror to the show. His eyes couldn't focus well. The edge of his view was a hazy white, and everything faded away. Jet black ears and tail. This was really bad. When the one with black ears, a black tail, and black markings appears, the world will be swallowed by evil. It was a legend from the old days. Poets often sang songs about it. He had heard them before. Cats with black ears and a black tail were rare. Therefore, they were despised as symbols of ill omen. Kanoe's appearance matched the legends perfectly. If he was seen by the cats in Karu, it would be the end. He would be killed for sure. They'd remove the existence of the cat who brought evil to the world, and they'd erase the fact that such a cat would be one of Karu. They wouldn't hesitate, not against a cat with no family who kept to himself. He was seized by scorching vexation. No matter how much he exhaled, the heaviness that collected in the depths of his stomach did not disappear. What should he do? What? His disgusting black tail shook greatly with frustration. It was like a dark snake. Kanoe thought about just tearing it off. Snake. Kanoe had almost forgotten about the dream because of the series of events that had happened. It was difficult for him to think anymore. The snakes, the dreams, the markings, his ears and tail. They all assailed his thoughts. Kanoe approached the barrel of water and dunked his face in without minding the sloshing water that spilled over. Kanoe forced himself to drink. When the lukewarm water sank into his stomach, he calmed down a little. Whenever he cleared his throat, his heated thoughts seemed to calm. He raised his head and stared at the trembling surface of the water. Looking like this, he couldn't go outside. What could he do? Kanoe felt helpless. There was only one choice. Kanoe dipped his fingertips in the water. Which should have been lukewarm felt awfully cold. He stood up, put the lid back on the barrel, and leaned on it afterwards. For a while, he looked up at the ceiling and thought. He had to flee the village. None of the other cats would accept Kanoe in his present state, and he wouldn't give in to the cats who ate each other just to see another day. If he stayed here, there were only two options: eaten or killed. Only those two. Kanoe felt anxious about leaving the house that held so many memories, but he couldn't cling to it forever. At least he would burn the memory into his eyes. He wouldn't let himself forget, even if his memories faded. His eyes roved over the room. The ceiling, the walls, the floor, the sparse furniture, the bed. He'd seen these things for as long as he could remember. They were dirty, but he wouldn't forget. Kanoe closed his eyes, and the scene before him was carved securely into his heart. Someday, he intended to return, even if he understood that it was impossible. Even if the place was in ruins, he wanted to come back. Slowly opening his eyes, he looked at his tail, which laid on the floor. He tried to move it in the spur of the moment.
気味悪いな。
Disgusting, he muttered. His tone was full of self-mockery. However, it really was his tail. Everything happening now was reality. It was unbelievable, and his hatred did not yet fade. but he could do nothing but accept it. Kanoe sighed and looked up at the night sky. He could probably flee in the middle of the night. It was easy to move under the cover of darkness. But if he left the village, where would he go? Kanoe had not thought of that. He didn't stand a chance. The neighboring villages everywhere else would be just like Kaoru. He couldn't show himself at those places either. The only place he could go was Ransen, the largest city in Sisa, and it had not been invaded by the Void, and did not have the sacrifice system. If Ransen attracted cats of all sorts, maybe they would understand the cause and find the cure for his symptoms. But the problem was getting there. There are not many stories of cats reaching Ransen from as far as Kaoru safely. Between Kaoru and Ransen was a dangerous forest. In the southern forest, the void eroded everything. But to the north, it was different. It was a forest of abundant green where one could easily get lost. The forest of illusion. It was said that cats would fall for the illusions and return to the same place over and over again. It was said that once they entered, they couldn't get out again. The erosion of the void was also much quicker there than in the south. Some had started calling it the Void Forest instead. And Ransen was not close at all. It was also said that monsters were appearing. Entering the northern forests was practically asking to die. Still, he had no choice. Kanoe could do nothing but advance if he wanted to live. He weakly leaned against a barrel in his dark home and looked out the window at the sky. It was a night where the moon of shadow brightly poured its pale light. Kanoe just wanted to curl up and sleep, but in the end he couldn't get to sleep at all. His nerves were on edge because of these repeated, unexpected events. Kanoe gave up on sleeping and stretched to disperse his fatigue. He lit a guiding leaf and began to pack his bag. Every now and then he saw a black shadow at the edge of his vision and jumped. It was just his own tail, but he wasn't used to it. He packed a worn linen bag with food. All he had were grass roots and nuts. In addition, he packed 2 flasks of water. I should take those just in case, Kanoe thought, and took a bag off a shelf. There were oval stones with different colors inside. When his mother was alive, she used these. They were what Sisa used as currency. He had only spent a little money so far, mostly for expendable supplies. However, he'd need it when he went to the town. A folded paper was also in the bag. It had several short words written on it. His mother told him they were lyrics. She told him that his father, who loved music, sang them because it was written in the language of 2 canes. Kanoe couldn't read it. He tied the bag back up, then he fixed his clothes. What should he do about the marks? With complicated feelings, Kanoe held both of his arms in front of him, considering what he would do with them. It was just like the ominous legend. In this situation, Kanoe couldn't just walk around outside like this, let alone enter Ransen. With that thought in mind, Kanoe picked up a coat from his clothes shelf. It was covered in dust. When he spread it out, dust flew in the air and he turned his face away. Although it smelled a little damp when he put it on, it covered his whole body. If he wore the hood over his head, he could hide his ears. It was just the right time as well because winter was coming up. The climate in Sisa could be called an eternal spring, but according to the 2 Canes calendar, the 11th and 12th round moons marked a drop in temperature. All his preparations seemed about done. To make sure he hadn't forgotten anything, Kanoe gave one last look around the room. The red flower arranged in a small dish of water caught his eye. It was the flower Tokino had given him. His face now came to mind. When Kanoe had a fever, Tokino had been really worried about him. Maybe he'd return soon to check up on Kanoe. Be surprised to see that Kanoe was suddenly gone. But Kanoe thought it was for the best. In this kind of state, it was better not to involve Tokino. It was better to keep it that way. And they become exes, as Tokino will just forever look on wistfully out the window, wondering what happened to his war-forgotten husband. Will he ever come back? Even though Kanoe understood it, he was still worried. He couldn't just casually tell Tokino about this, right? Troubled, Kanoe decided to leave a stone coin on the shelf. Tokino knew that Kanoe didn't use coins. He would understand something had happened. Kanoe shouldered his bag and looked at the home he'd spent many years in. Even though it was very simple and basic, he was alright with it. Look at this frickin' goth Red Riding Hood. Finally, he picked up the guiding leaf, which was floating in the small dish. After staring at the warm, pulsing light for a while, Kanoe slowly opened the door and headed out. And that's where I'm gonna get a drink. I will be right back. Hydration, hydration. Mix the hydration into the water. I'm using flavor packets in my water because fuck you, I can. Also, Propel packets are so fucking cheap and they make the water even more hydrating because electrolytes. Okay, that feels much better. I thought it was starting to get a little scratchy. The weak moonlight illuminated the village road. Kanoe narrowed his eyes and watched the landscape before him. Occasionally, cold wind brushed past his cheeks. The scent of the soil, wind, and forest. One would think it would be the same as everywhere, but it wasn't. In Kauru, there was a scent that only belonged there. He needed to leave the village quickly, something he had always thought about doing. However, Kanoe was surprised at how he hesitated now. Perhaps it was because this was the village where he was born and raised? The feelings from all the time he spent here were engraved into him one by one. Excuse me. He didn't need to look anymore. Closing his eyes to burn the memory into his mind, Kanoe headed to the entrance of the village. He walked on the village road carefully. Before long, the silhouette of the dark forest appeared before him. Kanoe stopped and looked up. He had made it this far. Whatever would happen, would happen. There is no point in being frightened. There is no other way. Furrowing his eyebrows, Kanoe began to walk again. There was a light that appeared and disappeared between the trees. A flame? It looked like someone was carrying a torch. Who would go into the forest at this hour, and for what reason? When he looked harder to try and see it more clearly, a strong gust of wind blew his hood back. Kanoe hurriedly pulled it back up. Kanoe looked behind him. Startled, he could smell another cat on the wind. Someone was in the shadows. They were trying to suppress their presence. Oh my god, look. Look at him. Look at this emo. Look at this edgy little emo protagonist boy. Look at this fucking twink. He'd been preoccupied with the suspicious flame flickering in the forest. He hadn't noticed them. Two glimmering eyes stared right at Kanoe. The cat stood up slowly and uttered a low growl.
この絵お前なんだその耳
Kanoe, you...
尻尾の色もだ
What's with your ears? And your tail's color? He had seen them.
そんな色じゃなかったよな
Can't be.
その色
It's the unlucky
まさか
color.
不吉な
Kanoe, don't
まさ
tell
か
me.
この絵
You're the-
お前は
The cat raised his voice and bared his fangs as he spoke. It was the worst situation. He had to avoid fighting. If the other cat made the situation worse and more cats gathered, Kanoe would be able to escape. In this case... Kanoe suddenly turned around and dashed towards the forest.
待て
Wait! Kanoe heard footsteps coming after him, but he didn't look back and kept running. The cat wouldn't chase him into the forest. Kanoe rushed onwards and leapt into the forest. This angle! Hello, perspective. They're getting fancy.
待てこの絵
Wait, Kanoe! Can't actually be that loud. There are other people in this house. The cat ran after him for a while, but before long, Kanoe no longer heard his voice. Just as he thought, the cat would not enter the forest. Plot twist, what if they actually wanted to help him? And this guy is just fucking bowler hat dude syndrome, like fucking thinking everyone hates him. And when he's just like Nah, you're just a weird dude that chills. We're cool with you. We're part of the community, yo. I have to click this. How long had he run? Kanoe stopped and caught his breath. That cat would surely report this to the elder, but this was the forest where, once you entered, you wouldn't be able to escape. He doubted they'd chase him here. Look at your like arm sleeves, gloves, gloves. The word is gloves. But still, look at this. It's like you have a look going. Calming his breathing down, Kanoe carefully looked around. Sorry. All the thick trees looked the same. The overlapping branches and leaves blocked the moonlight. There was no wind, but his footsteps made a sound in the grass. It wasn't so different from the rumors. It was really a strange forest. It wouldn't be a surprise that monsters were living here. But it was better than being murdered in the village. He had been chosen as a sacrifice anyway. He couldn't live in Kaoru anymore. In any case, Kanoe had to get through this forest. It was easier said than done, but he had no plans of dying here. Okay, it is 9:06. We'll go for another hour, and where we are at that point is where we will be. Kanoe carefully checked the coat he wore. It didn't seem to be torn anywhere. The coat could withstand the travel past the trees and plants. In other words, this area hadn't been eroded by the void. Kanoe let out a sigh of relief and sat down by the roots of a tree. The wind passing through the forest was cold. It permeated through his clothes, even though he wore his coat. Kanoe's ears twitched, and he drew one knee up to his chest. What should he do now? Kanoe was forced to come here, but now that he was here, there was nothing he could rely on. Until the moon of light rose, he would advance carefully through the trees. It might be dangerous, but it was better than doing nothing. Monsters, would they appear here? He hadn't heard anything about them in Kaoru. Kaoru? I'm gonna keep saying Kaoru. That reminded him, what was the torch-like flame he saw before entering the forest? Was there someone else here? But Kanoe didn't understand why anyone would enter the forest, especially in the dead of the night. Thinking, Kanoe stared at the dark grove ahead of him. That flame had blazed and floated. It floated in that way, just like that. The flame, it definitely wasn't an illusion. It was flickering in front of him. His nerves shook. Kanoe crouched down and lowered his ears as he watched cautiously. It seemed like a torch. He faintly saw a hand grasping a piece of firewood. A cat? Or a monster? If it was a cat, who was it? The torch's flame swayed gently. Imagine what this would be like if they were all anthro cats instead of nekos, or even step further, like a cat's return style. Like this was freaking adult, edgy, yaoi warrior cats. Someone has to have created that. I can't be the only one who had just thought of that just now. The torch's flame swayed gently. Kanoe stared at it without blinking. If possible, he wanted it to go away. However, the situation rose against his wishes. He thought it was getting closer? There was some distance between Kanoe and the flame. Had he been noticed anyway? All of his hair stood on end. Whether it was a cat or a monster, he did not know. Still, what should he do? Reaching his hand to the sword at his waist, Kanoe stopped moving. He felt he knew the figure who walked through the grove. He didn't know for sure, but the figure seemed to be wearing long clothes. A shadow of a certain cat passed through Kanoe's mind. The figure before him and the figure in his memories now came together. As the distance closed, Kanoe was sure. It was the poet. His hair stood on end for a different reason this time. He unintentionally shook his tail left and right. The poet slowly drew near, holding his torch. Kanoe abandoned his caution and stood. If he stopped to think about it, it should have been odd to see someone in the forest this late. But for some reason, he didn't think about that with the poet. You have a crush. God, fucking Meeks. Oh my god, my throat is so fucking dry. There is a mysterious and calm air about the poet. His silent movements brought relief to Kanoe. Kanoe was interested in him ever since their meeting before. Phone, shut up. Where are you? Boom. It's right in front of my face. There you go. Ah. Shut up, phone. Kanoe was interested in him ever since their meeting before. He didn't know anything about him, yet he felt attracted to his existence. He didn't know why, but the atmosphere of the poet was awfully sad. He was able to meet him again, only the thought satisfied Kanoe now. When Kanoe approached him, the poet stopped and put his musical instrument on the ground. The forest rustled. All fell silent in the forest around the poet.
あんたは一体
Who exactly are you? There was no answer. The poet only smiled. But Kanoe kept asking questions, as if the floodgates had been opened.
どうして森にどうしてここに俺がいることが分かったんだ 偶然なのか
How did you know I
あん
was
たは
here?
何者なんだ
Was it a coincidence? Who are you? There was no answer. Kanoe couldn't see the eyes behind the hood very well because of the shadows, but he felt the poet was staring at him. The poet turned to look back to the forest behind him and made an unhurried gesture.
何
What? The poet nodded silently.
何かあるのかその先に
There's something up ahead? The poet turned his back on Kanoe and gazed at the sky. His long clothes fluttered subtly. Feeling like he was looking at a dream, Kanoe squinted. A cat who didn't speak and only sang, but he behaved like his songs were all he needed. It really was mysterious. The poet looked over his shoulder again. Their eyes met briefly. Kanoe didn't understand, but he certainly felt it. Before he could ask, the poet turned his face away and began to walk. Was Kanoe supposed to follow him? Was it alright if he followed? Kanoe was confused, and the poet kept walking on. Why should he hesitate? He was alone, after all. Maybe the poet wasn't an enemy Kanoe had to avoid. He decided to follow him. Kanoe stared at the poet's back in front of him and began to walk through the thick, dense forest. Shadows of demons were creeping closer. Oh, that's a fucking shift. As Kanoe looked at the shaking branches and leaves of the trees, he thought of such things. The forest was really dark. The smell of grass was unpleasant. The humidity clung to his fur uncomfortably. Kanoe followed closely after the poet so as to not lose sight of him and his torch. Where exactly were they going? The poet walked so smoothly he seemed like he was floating. A strange cry sounded somewhere. The whole forest hushed and watched Kanoe. Meanwhile, the poet was his only guide. Excuse me. Darkness filled his view, and then suddenly the brush opened up before him. Ahead was a small clearing. There was a large stone in the middle, a boulder. When the poet reached the side of the boulder, he looked to Kanoe, as if to beckon him over. Kanoe approached at a quick pace. There were several large stones in the circle, and tall grasses grew thickly. Between the stones, there was a gap that was big enough for Kanoe to crawl into. Kanoe cast his eyes to the poet. He received a small nod in return. Kanoe lowered his posture and crawled into the gap between the stones. Inside was a little damp, and he felt a chill when he sat down. He drew his tail in and tucked it between his feet. It was small and dark, but strangely, Kanoe liked it. He leaned against the stone, sighed, and cast his eyes towards the poet. And he's gone! Kanoe stretched his body and looked around. He was gone. He was just there, and then he disappeared like a mirage. Utter amazement, Kanoe slowly returned to the gap between the stones. Was Kanoe being deceived? Or was this all an illusion? At the thought, he immediately crawled out of the gap. Was it a trap? Kanoe hid in the bushes and watched. He heard nothing besides the rustling of the trees. Returning to the gap between the stones once again, Kanoe tried to think. Even though he felt suspicious, Kanoe still thought the poet wasn't an enemy. Perhaps he knew Kanoe was lost and came with the intention to guide him. Kanoe had such a feeling. When he closed his eyes, the image of Kaoru he saw before leaving revived once again. His appearance had been recognized by a cat of his village. He couldn't forget the fear in his eyes when he saw such a horrible thing. Pain ran through his throat and chest. He couldn't go back anymore. As Kanoe kept still, sleep crept up on him. He couldn't sleep here, but his body felt weary. Even while he thought he mustn't sleep, he felt his eyelids grow heavy. Kanoe gradually fell asleep. Enveloped in the morning air, Kanoe woke up. His view was clouded with a white haze. As his consciousness cleared, he realized it was fog. Whoa, what the fuck was that? Forest illusion, lost in the forest. Ooh. Oh. Okay, that was cool. He got up from the stone he was leaning on. Because of the uncomfortable posture, his body creaked in protest. He crawled out from the gap in the stones and stretched. Kanoe turned his eyes to his tail and was still shocked to see it had turned black. This was the first time he'd seen it in the light. He checked the marks on his arms and legs. They were black, and they seemed even more detestable than they did at night. Kanoe rubbed them lightly, but they didn't go away. His ears must still be black, too. He realized how hopeless the reality was and began to feel depressed. But feeling that way wouldn't help him. Fuck. Throat so dry. So scratchy. Water not helping. He rolled up the sleeves of his shirt and began to groom. Kanoe looked around the morning forest. The atmosphere was a little different now that the bright sky had replaced the dark of the night. When he was done grooming, Kanoe shouldered his burnlap bag and stood up. By chance, he remembered the pullet. He didn't know whether that was a dream or reality. Mulling over the mysterious events of the night before, Kanoe walked through the forest. Even though it was morning in the forest, he couldn't let his guard down. He had to watch out for the void above all else. Kanoe scratched at the trunks of trees as he walked. While he confirmed the position of the moon of light, Kanoe carefully traversed the forest. Even though it was brighter than it was at night, the odd atmosphere didn't change. Kanoe stopped and sniffed the air. He smelled the scent of water, different from the humidity. Perhaps there was a spring nearby. He pushed aside some bushes and found a small pool of water. Several leaves floated in it, but it was otherwise clear. It looked like a spring. This fucking visual novel is over 30 hours long. What the hell? This was made in 2006. Why? Why? That's just one playthrough. Oh my god. Okay, he pushed aside some... Okay, I already read this. Suddenly feeling thirsty, Kanoe stooped down towards the water. The water was cold enough to sting, but it felt comfortable. Kanoe closed his eyes tightly. He lifted his face up. Water sprayed in the lights. After shaking his head several times, he lapped the water with his tongue. The coldness on his face was sweet. When he was done, Kanoe wiped his face with the hem of his coat and tossed out the water in his flasks and refilled them with fresh water. After having a drink, Kanoe felt rejuvenated. When he stood, Kanoe caught something glittering from the corner of his eye. He squinted. Something like a bracelet lay at the root of a tree. It was well polished and reflected light. Had someone dropped it? Are we going to get a bracelet accessory to complete our new look? Had someone dropped it in a place like this? The shiny bracelet seemed awfully pretty, and Kanoe reached out for it. It was an act of simple curiosity, but as soon as his fingertip touched the bracelet, Kanoe felt a shock. He withdrew his hand in a panic, and his heart raced like it would burst. A hot pulse beat through his ears. It felt like he had been struck from within. Kanoe gritted his teeth and knelt down. His vision shook. Whether it was the ground, the air, or himself shaking, he couldn't tell. How does air shake? Kanoe didn't understand what was happening. The intense pulsing didn't stop, and he began to pant. Sweat rolled down his temple. It felt familiar. It felt just like when he empathized with someone. Oh, he's being an empath. He's so empathetic, guys. Trust me. Kanoe rubbed his forehead against the ground. A green color appeared and shook along with his vision. Something rustled. Was it moving? Gradually, he realized this green color was of a forest. A vision was playing in his mind's eye without his permission. It was an odd feeling, like he was borrowing the sight of someone else. This wasn't his memory. Then whose was it? It was definitely in this forest. He didn't recognize the sound. Even if he did, the ringing in his ears made it difficult to. Occasionally, the view tipped downwards, where Kanoe could see the ground. He seemed to be advancing. But where was he going? Meanwhile, Kanoe's pain continued. Unable to endure it, he screamed out. The image blurred as if in tandem with his spirit. Seriously. Are we still alive? Are we still going? Okay, I think we're still going. Cool. It just hard crash. Then the verdant memory ended. Kanoe opened his eyes, stunned for a little while. He breathed harshly. The pain that tormented his body had inexplicably disappeared. Just now. Was it a dream? No, it was different. It wasn't a dream. Kanoe was surely conscious. Was it the forest? Was it an image of the forest? No shit, Sherlock. Kanoe slowly raised his body and looked at the bracelet, resting at the roots of the tree. It looked like an ordinary bracelet at first glance, but when he touched it, it shocked him.
見えたんだ。そいつの記憶。
Did you see it? That memory! Suddenly, he heard a voice from overhead. Kanoe jumped, but then laid down low. He looked over the surrounding grove, but there was nothing standing out in the deep green.
どこ見てんのさ。全然違うよ。
Where are you looking? You're completely off. A slightly high-toned voice echoed with laughter from all directions. He didn't know where it came from. Feeling like even his breathing was noisy, Kanoe held his breath.
こっちだったら。
Here I am. He heard an impatient voice behind him. When Kanoe turned around, a shadow jumped out. The shadow turned around in the air and landed before Kanoe. A number of leaves fell and fluttered around. Kanoe jumped back immediately.
ひどいな。そこまで逃げることないのに。
Oops, the fuck are you? Hello? Little snake twink? Little snake twink jester? Hi, hello. That's not nice. You don't have to run away like that. The shadow was a boy dressed in strange red clothes, smiling mischievously. He had pale skin that seemed almost transparent. Kanoe fixed his eyes on him without dropping his guard. Sniffing the air, the boy didn't smell like a cat. Besides that, he had a strange, hairless and shiny tail snaking between his legs. He was not a cat. Kanoe tensed even more. The boy clasped his hands behind his back and bowed mockingly.
ずいぶん用心深いんだね。
You're rather cautious, are...
でも心配しなくても何もしないから。
Okay, there's a period there. That's not all one sentence. You're rather cautious. Are all Rebecca like that? Don't worry, I won't do anything.
真っ黒になっちゃった猫さん。
Mr. Kitty turned black. This guy's gonna be so much fucking fun. I love him already. At his words, Kanoe felt a shock that shook him from his tail to the tips of his ears. How did the strange boy know that?
お前、一体何者だ?
You. Just what are you? Kanoe lowered his ears and glared at the boy, who put one hand on his waist and the other on his chest.
それじゃあ、まずは自己紹介から。
First, allow me to introduce myself. I am Fury. Pleasure to
まあ、
meet you.
敵か味方かって聞かれたら、味方とは言えないだろうね。
I can't really say I'm a friend. The boy, known as Fury, lowered his head respectively.
どうして俺のことを知ってる?
Why do you know about me?
どうしてだと思う?
Why do you think? Anger rose in him because of Fury's teasing. Kanoe growled as he felt like throwing himself on Fury at any moment.
Yeah.
Tell me.
ああ、怖い怖い。
Scary,
そんなに怒るなよ。
Don't get so angry.
俺がどうしてお前を知ってるかとか、
Doesn't really
そんな
matter
の
how I
どうでも
know
いいじゃない
you,
か。
right? Fury shrugged exaggeratedly.
だって世界は広いんだからさ。
It's a big world out there.
俺はお前にとって
I must be really
いかにも怪
suspicious
し
to
いも
you.
の。
Isn't that right?
そうなんだろ？だったら
But then,
怪しい
if
俺
I'm
が
so
お前のことを知っ
suspicious,
てたって
there's nothing
不思議
strange
でも
about
なん
me
でもない。
knowing about you.
違う？
Or is that wrong?
黙れ.
Shut up. Riveting comeback. He didn't want to hear such things. Kanoe clenched his fists and felt a sharp prick. Instead of using his sword, Konoe wanted to strike him directly with his claws. When he sensed Konoe's anger, Fury took a step back.
Oh, 怖っ。そんなことよりもさ、もっと知りたいことがあるんじゃないの？例えば、さっきの腕輪とか。
Oh my god, look at his sprites! Oh my god, this boy. This boy, I love you. I love you. You're so fun. The bracelet. When Konoe's expression changed, Fury laughed in triumph. He jumped off the ground and sat on a branch slightly higher than Konoe.
気になってるんだろ？
You want to know, right? That
そいつに触ったら
bracelet
変なものが
makes
見
you
え
see
ちゃ
and
ったもん
feel
だ
something
から。
strange when you touched it. Fury made a gesture towards the offending object.
もう気づいてるかもしれないけ
She
ど、
looked like a devil, I
お
love
前
it.
が見たのは記憶。
You might have already
そいつの
noticed,
記憶さ。
but what you saw were someone's memories. His memories.
記憶？
Memories? そう。
Yes,
腕輪のね。
of the bracelets. Fury threw something down from the tree. It was a pendant. It was a little bit ornate, but it was considerably old.
触れてごらんよ。
Touch it. Fury shifted his feet and tilted his head.
触れてごらんったら。
I said
それとも
touch
怖いの？
it. Or are
だ
you
ったらやめれば？
scared? That's
別に無理強い
okay.
しない
Don't
し。
do it. I won't force you. Konoe knew he was being provoked, but he was still angry. He half-heartedly reached for the pendant. His heartbeat pulsed as soon as his fingertips touched it. Again, this feeling. It was just like with the bracelet. The same sense of confusion, the reckless driving of his heart and body, the headache. Unable to stand any longer, Konoe fell to his knees. In his head, a memory began to play. This time, the image was of a room, but it was dark and unclear. The image shook. It felt like he was in a fight. Suddenly, a shadow covered his view. Breathing felt painful. He couldn't breathe. Konoe gritted his teeth and endured it. His mind became numb, and a high-pitched sound rang in his ears. Just as he thought he couldn't take it anymore, a strong sensation surged through his thoughts. I'm going to be killed. Oh, I should fucking turn off the UI first. Konoe opened his eyes wide. He grasped the pendant tightly in his sweaty hand. Konoe turned his gaze overhead, his shoulders heaving as he panted. Fury smiled slightly and stared at him.
見えた？
Did you see it? Fury leapt off the branch.
そのペンダントは
Got
ね、
up, phone.
ある少女が大切にしていたんだ。
There was a girl who loved
け
that
どある日、
pendant.
少女は
One day,
家に押し入ってきた
bandits
強
broke
盗
into
に
her
殺され
house and
た。
killed her.
ペンダント
You
は
saw it
少
from
女
the
の
pendant's
胸で揺れ
eyes
な
as
がら
it
見て
swung
いた。
against her chest.
少女
Every
の
little
命が
detail
握り
of
つ
her
ぶされる
life
まで
being
の
crushed out of
一
her.
部始終を
You
さ。
shared a glimpse of that
お前
memory.
はその一端を共有して、
The memory of a murdered girl? The suffocating feeling returned to his chest, and Konoe furrowed his brows. He was able to see the memory of these objects just by touching them. But
今までにこんなこと一度も
never
なかった。
experienced something like that until now. Oh my god, why is my throat so fucking dry? Besides, what could he gain from the ability of seeing memories of objects? Empathizing with the emotions of others to this degree was difficult to deal with. The shock he felt when he watched the memory of an object felt the same as when he empathized with others. Kanoe didn't need any more of this burden. Fury smiled mockingly at Kanoe.
そりゃそうさ。
Is that
だってそれ
so?
はお前
Is
の
it
中で
in
新
really
た
a
に生まれた
wind
力なんだ
power
も
of
の。
yours?
力
Power?
そう。
Yes.
不可
It was
抗力って
inevitable, I
やつ。
suppose.
そも
First
そも
off, it
お
isn't
前の希
something
望
you
でどう
can
こうできるような
use as
話
you
じゃないの
wish.
さ。ただし。
However, Fury began to walk around him in a circle. Ooh, that stance, that sass, that disrespect. His tail shook every time he stepped forward.
触れれば何でもかんでも
It
って
won't
わけじゃ
happen
ない。
with everything you touch.
記憶を見ることができるの
Only
は
things in
それなり
you
の
with
思いや
strong
年月が
emotions
詰まったも
built
のだ
up
けだ。
over time
そ
will
れ
let
に
you view their
見るのが
memory.
嫌なら触れるものを意識しないようにすれ
You
ばい
won't
い。
be able to skip the bad
つまり
parts. In other words, Fury stopped and stared defiantly at Kanoe.
他のやつの感
It's
情に
the
共
same
感
as
しないようにする
empathizing
の
with
と
the
同
emotions
じ
of
ことだよ。
others. Just how much did Fury know? Kanoe felt like his fur was being rubbed the wrong way.
ものの記憶を読み取る力。
Power to read memories
時間を
of
遡る
distant
力。
times. It may
もち
seem
ろん
like a coincidence,
偶然そうなっ
but
た
it
わけじゃ
isn't.
ない。
Your body isn't either.
お前の体も何もかもがね。
どういう意味だ
What do you mean?
どういう意味
What
でしょ
do I mean, you ask? Fury shrugged.
ふざけるなお前は
Don't
何
kid
を
around.
どこまで
How
知ってる
much do you know? Tell
全
me
部話せ
everything.
嫌だね。
Nah,
教
won't
え
it
ちゃ
be
ったら
boring
つ
if
ま
I
ら
just
ないだ
tell
ろ。
you? Life is more
だって
fun when there's
人
highs
生は
and
山あり
lows.
谷ありの方が楽しいものね。お前たちが
Your
大好き
beloved
な先祖。
ancestors were the
二つ
two
杖だっ
kings,
け。
yes.
あいつらも
Weren't
そう
they
だっ
like
たんだろ。
that too?
悩んだ
Even though
り
they
苦し
feared
ん
and
だりするた
suffered,
めに
they
あえ
still
て危ない
traveled
と
to
ころへ
dangerous
行ったり
places and
争いを
fought.
起こしてたんじゃないの。今のお前は謎だらけ。
You're full of mysteries.
困ってるし
Don't
どうして
know
いい
what
の
to
か
do.
わからない。
Go ahead and
けど
worry.
悩んで
Suffer,
苦しんで
struggle.
あがいてごらん
Someone
よ。
is interested in
それを
watching
見て
you.
いる方がいらっしゃる。
見ている
Watching me?
そう見ているのさ。
Right.
お前のことを
Always
ずー
watching
っ
you.
と。
Someone was watching him. You know, I shivered.
これは一つの試練。
A trial.
そう考えればいい。
Think of this as a trial.
試練
A trial.
そう試練だよ
That's。right. A
せいぜいあの
trial.
方を楽しませてごら
Please
ん。
him to the utmost.
じゃなきゃ
If you don't,
死ぬだけだ。
you might just die. I want to fucking cosplay this little fucking freak twink.
どういうことだ
What do you
Oi!
mean? Hey! Fury kicked off the ground before Kanoe finished speaking and jumped onto a high branch behind him. He put a hand on his chest and theatrically lowered his head.
俺は開演する舞台の
I'm
幕
the
を上げ
king
に
to
来たんだ。
raise the curtain on this
この絵、
stage.
これからどうぞよろ
It's
しく。
been a pleasure.
じゃあね。
See you.
待て
Wait! Kanoe followed him and began to climb up the tree. However, Fury's body rose into the air. Fury twirled elegantly and curled his tail, then vanished into thin air. What? Cheshire Cat? God, my throat's so fucking dry. I need more warm water. Kanoe stared at the shaking branch in disbelief. Kanoe. That's what he'd called him. Fury knew his name. His enemy knew about him. It was like someone was leading him by the hand through this series of events. His anger rose. Entertain him? What a joke. Why did he have to go through this? For what reason? Why? Kanoe gritted his teeth and raked his nails against the ground with all his might. He didn't know why he was giving in to his anger, but he was unable to contain himself. He raised his arms and clawed furiously at the surrounding trees. He wanted to tear it all apart.
くそ
Damn it! Whenever his nails dug into the trunks, he felt an indescribable emptiness in his heart. Kanoe wanted to tear apart that emptiness. He clawed at the trunks and tore the leaves. After raging for a while, he finally stopped. He crouched down and breathed roughly. Kanoe's heartbeat had slowed down, but he was assaulted by an intense self-loathing instead. There wasn't any point in being so violent. It was useless. But it was unforgivable, even if it all was just coincidence. He needed to settle this. But Kanoe knew it wasn't so. There was someone responsible for his hopeless situation. He didn't know if that boy, Fury, was telling him truth or lies, but he knew there was someone else involved. Until now, he had resolved to leave his hometown and nearly died. So then he wouldn't forgive anyone involved in this. Kanoe sighed and looked down to his hands. His nails were torn because of his temper. He looked over his hands to soothe it. As he did so, Kanoe remembered the emptiness he felt when he raged a while ago. After all, he couldn't do anything but move forward. If he stayed and let his anger fester, nothing would change. There was no other choice but to keep living. It was a feeling unlike surrendering. No, not long ago, he would have thought of this as giving up. But something had changed in Kanoe. He wanted to discover the true nature of the person driving him into this. He would find him and tear him apart with his claws and fangs. Therefore, he had no choice but to move forward, even if he might fail. Feeling a new flame burn inside him, Kanoe stood up. He cast his eye to the pendants. He grabbed it by the chain and looked at it at eye level. After seeing the memory, he didn't want to handle it carelessly. Kanoe quietly put the pendant near the bracelet. He cast his eyes between the two. When he saw the memory of the bracelet, Kanoe felt the presence of someone in agony. The presence was fresh. Maybe the person had been here recently. Not even a day seemed to have passed since it had been tossed aside. He'd touch it once more, but that was the thought that crossed his mind. Even though there would be agony once more, just thinking about it made his ears lower. Maybe he'd find some clues. After hesitating, Kanoe took a small breath and made up his mind. He held his hand out to the bracelet. His trembling fingertip touched the surface lightly. His heart raced. He felt himself being pulled back into the whirlpool of torture. Putting a hand against the tree trunk to support his body, Kanoe concentrated on the image that began to form in his mind. The green light scattered, and the image cleared bit by bit. Something like clothing was reflected in the edge of his vision. This presence, it was definitely a cat. On the move. Before long, a small puddle entered his field of vision. It was the place where Kanoe was now. Then the image of a large bag appeared. He couldn't see it clearly, but it seemed to be filled with lots of different things. The image shifted in and out of the bag several times. Then the view moved slightly. Then he saw the ground. For an instant, he saw something like the hem of a coat. Something chased him, but then the memory cut off. He let go of the bracelet. Kanoe exhaled when he was freed from the pain. He raised his head and looked back at the puddle. The owner of the bracelet seemed to have passed through here. He should go that way too. This is weird music. Kanoe lifted his bag and began to walk after checking the position of the moon of light. Kanoe threaded through the grove. From there, the scenery continued on and on, just like a maze. The moon of light had set and colored the clouds red, and the moon of shadow floated in the sky. As night fell, he started to worry that he'd been walking in circles. Once lost, you would never leave. He knew what they had meant now. As Kanoe walked carefully to avoid the void, he saw a large tree ahead. Its trunk was larger than those of the other trees, and its roots sprawled over the ground. It looked like a good place to rest. He felt his tail had been hounded with fatigue, and thought that soon the rest of his body would be too. Kanoe debated whether he should rest now or not, but feeling like he was just recklessly advancing, he decided to rest among the roots for tonight. Approaching the tree, Kanoe sat down to hide himself. He breathed in the cool night air and exhaled slowly. If Kanoe listened carefully in the silence, he could hear odd cries and noises. A scent of moist earth rose strongly from beneath his feet. He didn't know what could happen next. Kanoe dozed off until morning came, then scanned the surroundings with his ears. Okay, I know it's a bit early, but my throat is incredibly dry for whatever reason, and no one is watching, so I'm gonna stop here. Goodbye.